Yeah. So, Chris, you know what? It's really hard to believe, but sustainability has been around nearly 50 years. People are just can't believe that, but historians point to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that came out in 1977 as the very beginning of the sustainability movement. And then, you know what, from 1997 to about 2007, or 1977 to 2007, about 30 years,
Wow.
it was moving quite slowly. And then since 2007, it has just gone to the forefront of government regulations, business to business conversations, and it has really changed the conversation in some of the demographics, more so in Europe than in the US. But let's be honest, the economy today is so intertwined. Very few companies just work in the US or just work in Europe. Everybody's starting to trade across the borders. And so it's really interesting to see how the governments and regulations are changing it. But, you know, there's been a lot done. Everybody wants to talk about the 2015 Paris Accords. But I think you've told me that this is largely a US type of podcast. So let's focus in the North America and US. And all conversations these days are about the new regulations coming out from the Security and Exchange Commissions back March 6th. And simply put, what those regulations are going to require is that all publicly traded companies on any of the U.S. exchange, whether you're a U.S. company or a non-U.S. company but traded on the U.S. exchange, to disclose material climate risk. So basically that means, hey, is there a risk of extreme weather events or change in agricultural yields or water insecurity that could materially impact your business? And then what's the potential impact on the business, both financially and operationally? What's not said is, but we all know, if you see a risk and you pronounce there's a risk, you also have to take actions to mitigate that risk. And so with that, companies in the US are going to have to start looking a little bit broader that they have on sustainability. And you know what? I'd like to be really pragmatic about it, right? Not just sustainability, but if you don't like that word, let's talk about efficiencies and pragmatic business, right? You would never locate your warehouse in a flood zone, right?
Right.
But flood zones today are different than where they were if your warehouse was settled some 25 years ago, right? If you're in the produce or dealing with foods, you've got to worry about whether your suppliers, your produce suppliers, have the right kind of weather and temperature so that they can continue to produce at that rate. Those are the type of elements that companies are having to think about as, are they a risk to our future business?
So with all those new regulations coming in, has that impacted anything else, in regards to this conversation too, like any other constituencies? Like how are the banks looking at this in terms of, how they're financing a lot of these retailers and CPG companies? Are they putting sustainability into their covenants?
Absolutely. So what's exciting is that in 2021, so in the midst of COVID, the global banking institutions got together and they created this thing called the Net Zero Banking Alliance. It started with 44 banks. 3 years later, right, over the last 3 years, there's now 144 banks in 44 countries that have publicly committed to green their lending portfolios, right? So what this means are debt covenants are being evaluated based on sustainability criteria. If your request for financing includes sustainability terms and includes a view that this is not a short term, a short investment, but it's really looking at the long haul, you should receive better approval ratings, potentially better interest rates, better terms and conditions. So it's really becoming much more holistic and connected in with the financing than just in the operations.
Got it. So net, the incentives are also starting to align here over the last 3 years, particularly to get companies focused on this effort. I'm curious too, Danielle, I want to bring you into this conversation, see if there's any color that you have to add as well. And one particular thing I found interesting too was that I don't know if you want to touch on this, or we'll go back to DeAnn for it as well. Is it seems you mentioned the CPGs being, kind of multinational more so than the retailers, and them taking kind of the lead on sustainability for the industry. Is that true? And what other color do you have to add, Danielle?
It's interesting to consider sustainability with a more kind of, I'd say, an inside-outside approach. So thinking about, your infrastructure that you've got, but also within buildings, facilities that you've got as well. And not only is that a sensible thing to do, it's really a logical thing to do, because there are going to be so many factors outside of many facilities that a lot of companies that have got that can influence the inside. So, for instance, before making, massive investments or commitments, down the sustainability route, you need to think about, lots of things really, but you need to review your infrastructure and how it supports the direction of travel for your business.
Mhm.
So perhaps I can give you an example that just explains it a little
Sure.
bit better.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, I mean, I look after the grocery industry for Dematic. So let's say you're a grocer and you decide strategically that for your online orders, you're going to fulfill all of them in 24 hours. Okay. And then to meet this commitment for your customers, from a distribution infrastructure perspective, you'd need something like a localized hub and spoke model for distribution, meaning that your stock's going to have to be that bit closer to your end consumer or the customer. And let's say if you decided to go with a 2-hour commitment, well, that's going to have to change to something a bit more ultra local, maybe even automation within a store. So it's really important to ensure that that outside perspective can meet your overall strategic needs as well. So I just say, think about that when you're thinking about your overall sustainability strategy. Think about the bigger strategic angle that you're looking at too.
Well, and Danielle, how do CPGs and retailers, like as they're thinking about the things